Slacha should come to you, Om Shpacha, Ol Kilo, Ol Klal Yisrael. So we'll continue on a little bit with the limud that we started a couple of weeks ago, talking about the inyan of Yemais Mashiach. There's so many different aspects of that general topic of Geula. So really, what we've been talking about is one specific nekuda of that general sugya, which was the inyan of Malchus Yisrael, the inyan of the kingdom of the Jewish people, the Malchus of Knesset Yisrael, and what happened to it and what is happening to it in Golos and so on. So just the Chaza very quickly, sort of where we're holding, because every week it's a little bit, so far it's been like this building on the previous one. So again, it's like this. What we know is that there are two, again, just very quickly, there are two ways that we can see ourselves as a people. Number one is a lens, which is a perspective which is called Malchus Yisrael. And Malchus Yisrael, led by Malchus Beis David, which was existing in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. And the way to see ourselves through that lens is that we are individual people, but there's a collective, there's an entity called the Jewish people, a much larger mitzias, and that one entity of Knesset Yisrael has unbelievable power to it. And there's individual, and every single Jew is a limb off of that organism, a branch off of that tree. But all there is that tree. That's called. That truth, that identity of the Jewish people emerges when there's Malchus Yisrael. When Malchus Yisrael is established in Eretz Yisrael properly, that's when you have this reality, this consciousness of Knesset Yisrael, of Klal Yisrael. And then you have a matzav of Golos, where seemingly we don't have that. Malchus Yisrael is not in existence, seemingly, and all there is individual Jews with their own individual limited kaiches, and we partner with each other to accomplish things, but it's moving from a klal into prat. But what we saw a couple weeks ago in halacha is that that's not true. Even in halacha, that's not true. The malchus of the Jewish people did not cease to exist in Golos, and we have to restart things when Mashiach comes. Adarabba. What we saw a couple weeks ago in halacha is that no, malchus Yisrael exists even in Golos. It's just beskasia. It's just in hiding. It's concealed. We don't see it. It's not out in the open, but it does exist. And what that tells us in Pnimius is that consciousness, that reality that's called Knesset Yisrael, which redefines every single one of us from the individual, from just a little, like a person in a vacuum by themselves, to just part of this larger entity, that mitzias of Klal Yisrael, and which comes out from Malchus Yisrael, does not end in Golos, it goes into hiding. And so where does it go into hiding? So what we saw, the way we've been talking about the past couple of weeks, is that it goes into hiding into every single individual Jew. And so what's going on in Golos is an amazing thing, is that Klal Yisrael does exist, Knesset Yisrael exists, but Knesset Yisrael exists within every single Jew. And that's what we talked about. Now last week we saw from Rav Tzaddik, without getting into too much detail in the pratim of what we saw last week, but we learned a little bit based on Rav Tzaddik, is that during that tkufa, when Knesset Yisrael is in hiding, because that's what we saw the first week, that Knesset Yisrael is in hiding inside the individual person in Golos. But last week what we saw is to extend that even further and to expand upon that, is that inyan of Knesset Yisrael being concealed and being within every single individual Jew is really a tekufa in which the inner strength and the unlimited, infinite potential of Knesset Yisrael is really being unleashed. Because when Malchus Yisrael was out in the open during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, so it was out in the open, and you had the Jewish people, and it was unbelievable, it was amazing, it was gewaldic. But it's limited. It was Knesset Yisrael in its fullest sense was not really expressing all of its unbelievable infinite power. It's like the mashal I gave, I think last week, was when a person is outside of their house, they can't just let themselves loose and be themselves 100%. You gotta play the game. You gotta hold yourself back a little bit. You have to be a little bit more politically correct, or you have to be a little bit more held back when you're dealing with other people. When you're home, you can manage to be yourself. So when the Jewish people were on the outside, where we were on the world stage, there was a Malchus Yisrael. So it was unbelievable power to it, but it was a little bit held back. It was a little bit restricted. But when Knesset Yisrael returns, and not when it goes into hiding, dafka during Golos, inside of every single Jew, then koiches that Knesset Yisrael had which during the time of the Beis Hamikdash was not able to express itself because it was on the outside amongst the rest of the world. In the Jewish, inside of every single Jew, during Galus, some koiches are able to be unleashed that we had no idea we even had. And so the example we saw last week, Dafka and Rav Tzaddik, which is a classic Rav Tzaddik Dika style, is that the difference between Tarsh Bechsav and Tarsh Baal Peh, the difference between Nevuah and Tarsh Baal Peh. That's a classic example in the writings of Rav Tzaddik about how to show this dynamic, where you have a situation where you would define, on the surface, you would define it as Galus and terrible, but really what's going on during that time of Galus is that there's a power inside Knesset Yisrael that's being unleashed that was not unleashed during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. So the example we had again by Nevuah is amazing. Nevuah is something that comes when Knesset Yisrael is out in the open, right? But it's limited. It's limited. You can only have one message from Hashem by Nevuah. But by Tarsh Baal Peh, which as we saw is also a Klal Yisrael revelation, but it's a Klal Yisrael revelation Dafka during Galus contained within each and every Jew, then a much deeper truth is able to emerge, which is Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Lazar, right? Rabbi Yoshev and Rabbi Moshe. You can have all these different opinions, and Eilu V'El Elokim Chaim, which is in a certain sense a much greater expression and a much deeper expression of the unbelievable depth of the Jewish people, much more so than Nevuah. Because as amazing as Nevuah is, it's limited. It doesn't reveal the great depth of Knesset Yisrael in us just having one message and just one idea. As beautiful as it is, and as powerful as the Nevuah experience is, L'maisa, there's only one Navi per generation telling them what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants. But Dafka, when Knesset Yisrael goes into hiding inside of every single Jew, and it's not therefore limited and held back by how it's able by it being understood on the outside, it's able to be itself, so to speak. Then what emerges is an unbelievable depth, and in Rav Tzaddik's language, that depth in particular is Tarsh Baal Peh, an unbelievable ability to be able to convey God's will in a way that's beyond logic, that's above our understanding, that you could literally have two different opinions and they're both true, which is coming from a much deeper place than any mind can grasp. So there's a certain deeper truth that Knesset Yisrael is able to speak about and able to articulate Dafka when it's in hiding inside of every Jew. And we spoke about this, how when Mashiach comes and the Malchus based David and the Malchus of the Jewish people re-emerges on the outside, it doesn't go back to what it was. What's emerging on the outside with the coming of Mashiach is all that depth and all that nuance and that unbelievable mystery that's been been unleashed as the Jewish people, as Knesset Yisrael was in Golus inside of every single Jew, and it was comfortable enough to really speak its mind, and the mind of Knesset Yisrael, when it speaks its own mind, is beyond limitation, right? That is what's going to then emerge with the coming of Mashiach. So Malchus based David, which will emerge with Yemaisa Mashiach, is a much deeper and a much greater Malchus than what? Than the Malchus based David we had during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. Because what's going to emerge with Malchus based David with Mashiach is that Malchus Yisrael, which has been fully unleashed and fully expressed during the times of Galus, that is the Malchus Yisrael that's expressing itself with the coming Mashiach. And by the way, with this we can understand how, if you remember a couple weeks ago when we started this, the first thing we saw was a piece from the Rambam in his when he articulated that principle of faith in believing in Mashiach. And if you remember, part of that paragraph that the Rambam wrote is that part of the belief that you have to have is not only that there's such a thing as Mashiach, not only that he's a king that comes from David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech, but he said also you have to believe that king and that Malchus that he's going to usher in is going to be the greatest Malchus that the Jewish people ever had. Why is that? I mean, it's okay, it might be true, but why is that such a fundamental principle? Well, the answer is it's all part of what we're talking about. The Malchus Yisrael is revealed during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, but because it's out in the open, it's limited in terms of its ability to express itself, because it's not at home, so you have to sort of hold yourself back a little bit. Then Malchus Yisrael goes into hiding in the cave of every single individual Jewish heart, and at that point, although on the outside we don't see Malchus Yisrael, so therefore the Goyim give us trouble, and we don't have an army, and everything is falling apart on the outside, but on the inside, Knesset Yisrael is able to finally express itself. And the example again, like we saw last week, was Tarsh Bal Peh. When Knesset Yisrael expresses itself in a comfortable space that's private and hidden, then much deeper ideas emerge than what was expressed during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. But on the outside, things are falling apart. And then when Mashiach comes, that deep, expressed, fully unpackaged Knesset Yisrael, which was on the inside of the Jewish heart throughout Galus, that is what emerges with the Yemaisi Mashiach, much greater than what we had during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. So part of the process of Mashiach, to understand what's going on within Malchus Yisrael, is to realize that when Mashiach comes, it's a greater Malchus than ever was. Yeah.
I'm extrapolating here, so correct me. Does this mean that me meaning calling any individual looking at another Yid has a greater potential and a more difficult job in seeing the Kedusha in the person next to me? Because that person next to me is just containing, his neshama is containing so much more than even David HaMelech's neighbor or jester or prime minister.
Right.
He's containing more, it's more hidden, so therefore it's more difficult for me, and therefore that schus of achdus is really the primary goal of chutzlah.
Exactly. Rav Kook writes about that in one place. He says
about it other than Rav Kook. It's all hidden.
I stopped the recording, so it's okay. So Rav Kook talks about this. He says that one of the, it's an interesting thing. He says that one of the Imamish says this. I think I mentioned this last week, that what we're learning now is really a really big mafteach to all of his writings. He has a piece. Rav Kook has a piece where he talks about Rav Kook talks about the reality, the matzav of Golus, where we don't have shvatim. Like we have shvatim, obviously, but we don't know what shape that we're connected to. We don't have that sense of like tribes, You have Kahanim and Levim, but outside of that, most people don't know who they are. And so we see that as, that's part of like the breakdown of Malchus Yisrael, right? There's no king, knows what kingdom means. You know what larger part of Knesset Yisrael you're a part of. We don't have that anymore. So that's a tragedy. Rav Kook himself, the truth is, writes in one place that because of that, so now you have the opportunity in Galus to bring out your individuality and other types of kihilas that we would not have had the opportunity to do. In other words, the times of the Beis Hamikdash, you were Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and so on, and then that's it. There was no room for there to be the development of Sephardi and Ashkenazi. There was no room for there to be developed of a Yekish and a Polish Chassid. There was no room for that because you were part of that mishpacha that was Zvulun. That's who you were. But when it's another way of describing what we're talking about, where you have the Malchus on the outside. The Malchus of Knesset Yisrael has within it all the Shvatim, but also Sephardim and Ashkenaz. It has all these nuances too. But in order to really unleash all the different the shades and colors of Knesset Yisrael, then Knesset Yisrael has to go into hiding. And when it goes into hiding, and it doesn't have the external 12 Shvatim, so now it's forced, and it's not just forced, it's able to now express much deeper and more subtle nuances that it wasn't able to do until then. And then when Mashiach comes, so people ask, it's like when Mashiach comes, that means we're still going to have Sephardim and Ashkenazim? Yeah, we'll still have Sephardim and Ashkenazim. You still have Sidon and Litvaks. You're still going to have all of that. But it's going to also be with the Shvatim. And so now what you're going to have with the coming Mashiach is a much more developed Malchus Yisrael, much more developed Klal Yisrael. And that's what we've been saying. Okay, so that's all. Review a little bit. So now let's move on to basically what we just said, but other sides of this, other sides of this reality, other examples of this dynamic of the Jewish people, Davka in Golus, discovering deeper strengths that they didn't know they had, and then when Mashiach comes, those strengths we bring with us. But what we're going to do is right now, in the first few Amar Kamis, we're going to see this idea. We're going to take just a step back and see this idea that we're talking about again, of this dynamic of Golus, of Malchus Yisrael existing, but existing within the individual and within like a secret place. We're going to see this in the writings of the Arizal. Okay, we're going to see how there's a particular thing that I'm not saying everyone does do this, but that we certainly could do daily that connects to this avodah, that sort of connects to this idea. And that's what's called Tikkun Chatzos. Right, so I say the word Tikkun Chatzos, so automatically what people think of is like not Lawrence 2022. That's not what people think of when they say Tikkun Chatzais. Tikkun Chatzais means like some old dusty shtetl somewhere and some big tzaddik sitting by like a stove that warmed his whole house or whatever it is, and he's sitting by the stove and Tikkun Chatzais. Tikkun Chatzais is an avodah that the truth is, you look in the Zohar Kaddish, it's mamish, a huge inyan to bring geula. It's a huge avodah, especially at Breslov. Also, we'll see this next week maybe. Huh? Ribnitzer was known for Tikkun Chatzais. It was a very, very big avodah, very deep avodah. In Breslov, it's like a very, very big inyan to do Tikkun Chatzais. And it's one of those things, because people, it's always like people have this all or nothing mentality. So people think Tikkun Chatzais is that you have to stay up all night and staying up all night learning or something. And then at some point you say like, who knows, Tehillim or whatever it is, Zohar Kaddish, whatever is at midnight. That's not what Tikkun Chatzais has to be. It doesn't have to be like that. According to Rashash, for example, who knew what he was talking about when it comes to these things, he said the whole avodah of Tikkun Chatzais is just to be awake at the moment of midnight and to say those few kapitel Tehillim. It's not that long. It's a few kapitel Tehillim at that moment of midnight, and some people are up at midnight anyway. So you say a few kapitel Tehillim. Doesn't have to be with your shoes off and with the ashes. It doesn't have to be. You say a few kapitel Tehillim. That's Tikkun Chatzais. So Tikkun Chatzais, we'll see in a second, is broken down into two parts. You have what's called Tikkun Rachel and Tikkun Leah. It's all just a few kapitel Tehillim, which is called Tikkun Rachel, and a few kapitel Tehillim, which is called Tikkun Leah. Now, what does that mean? What's going on over here? So, what we're going to see now from the Arizal is that Tikkun Chatzais is sort of a microcosm of everything we're talking about. In other words, we know that nighttime is always, in Chazal we find this, that day versus night is always, Galus versus Gula, right? So nighttime is always sort of symbolic of Galus. So midnight, which is the darkest point of the night, is going to be symbolic of mamish, the depth of Galus. And so what we're going to see now in what a Jew does by Tikkun Chatzais, the specific ability that you say, is reflective of everything we're talking about, of Malchus Yisrael just being taken apart, but at the same time, it's being taken apart on the outside, but it's actually being built on the inside. And this is exactly what we're going to see with Tikkun Chatzais. In the language of the Arizal, I'll give you just a little bit background, then we'll be able to see it inside very easily. In the language of the Arizal, these two sides of Malchus Yisrael on the outside, like in its full glory, versus Malchus Yisrael on the inside, the chitzonius of a Jew versus the pnimius of a Jew. In the Arizal's language, the language is Rachel and Leah. Rachel always represents the part of the Jewish people which is on the outside. So Rachel Imenu is Yifasar, she's beautiful. Yaakov Avinu, he's the one that Yaakov Avinu wants to. She's the one that Yaakov Avinu wants to marry. Rachel Imenu is on the outside, whereas Leah always represents the inner dimension of the Jew, the inner dimension of Knesset Yisrael. Leah is the same letters as Oyel, in the tent, more modest. She's not as attractive on the outside. Even the children of Rachel are tzaddikim and they're holy, external beauty, right? Yosef tzaddik. Whereas the children of Leah, there's funny things going on. You have to dig a little deeper to find their greatness, So those are the two worlds of Rachel and Leah. And so the Arizal explains, we're going to see this inside, that at midnight, something's happening every single midnight within the neshama of a Jew, and it's reflective of Bechlal, what happens in Galus. And what the Arizal says, these are the words of the Arizal, we'll see it inside. The Arizal says that what happens every single midnight is that the neshama of a Jew experiences this inning of Galus. And what is it? So he says the side of you, which is called Rachel, begins to fall apart. It begins to descend into a low place, descend into Galus, right? So a person goes to sleep, right? And where does their mind go? The consciousness sort of falls apart, right? And then what takes over is the imagination, and who knows what's going on over there, right? And so the Rachel part of who a person is descends into Galus. In the language of the Arizal, again, we're just not be able to explain all this properly, but just to get the words down, we're able to see it. The Arizal describes Rachel Imenu, that outside, that chitzonius, that Malchus Yisrael on the outside, which falls apart, which goes into Galus. He describes that as moving from a place that's called Atzilus. Atzilus means when everything is built and proper, to Bria. Bria is a term that the Arizal uses for lower levels of reality, lower levels of the self. So Rachel Imenu falls apart, but the Arizal was Megala that what happens at midnight is that as Rachel Imenu falls apart, those those limbs, quote so to speak, of Rachel, are used by Leah for her to build herself up. So in other words, Rachel is being dismantled, but the elements that Rachel Imenu is losing are then being used by Leah for her to be rebuilt. This is the secret of what happened that first night of the Chasana, when Yaakov Avinu thinks it's Rachel, but really it's Leah, and Rachel is giving the simanim over to Leah. The simanim that Rachel Imenu gives to Leah is a deep Indian. It's exactly what we're talking about. Is that Rachel Imenu is giving over of herself. Those simanim were that weren't just like stam things. Those were simanim of real deep iskashras of who Rachel Imenu was vis-a-vis Yaakov Avinu, and she's giving that over to Leah. And so what's happening is this reality is that Rachel Imenu is falling apart, Malchus Yisrael is being dismantled, but at the same time that dismantling is rebuilding Knesset Yisrael in a much deeper place that's called Leah. And so this is reflected in Tikkun Chatzais, whereas you have, what we're going to see in a second, is that there's Kapitel Tehillim which are called Tikkun Rachel, and Kapitel Tehillim which are called Tikkun Leah. The Kapitel Tehillim that are called Tikkun Rachel are all Kapitel Tehillim talking about sort of mourning over the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the destruction of our Galus, because the Rachel side of who we are is falling apart in Galus. But the Kapitel Tehillim that's called Tikkun Leah are all psukim of Susham, Reshechem, psukim of love, psukim of yichud, psukim of simcha. And so there's a very strange dynamic. So are we happy, or are we like, what's going on with you? The answer is, that's exactly what Galus is. Rachel is falling apart, but the destruction of Rachel means the building of Leah. And so the Rachel Dikit Tehillim are what? Are psukim, are Tehillim of like Eicha, but the Leah Dikit psukim are Simcha, Vislavas, and Iskarvas. And this is, so what we're going to see is you read this in Arizal, it's like, okay, just words floating in outer space. But what the amazing thing is, with the background that we had the past couple of weeks, this is mamish what we're talking about. It's coming to life, and the Arizal is giving us a window into something that we can do every day to connect ourselves to this truth and to really sort of help the process along personally, that as Galus moves on, that we should be able to use that to build up our sort of inner core, our Leadik, our Leakite. So let's see it inside together. So Marmukah number 1, okay? So with the background, I think we should be able to read through it pretty quickly. This is from Shar Kavanis, Jushe Halayla, Jush Dalit. You should be proud of yourselves. Not too many Yidden, have any idea of what, to be able to learn a piece of Shar Kavanis from Jushe Halayla. It's a select group of Jews. It's not a Pashut thing. The Nimsa says that Rizal, therefore comes out. He's talking about what's going on at midnight. Ki shayrish Rachel v'ikara ein rak nekuda achas bolvad. He says he's describing the process of Rachel Imenu being taken apart and dismantled, and he says because ultimately Rachel Imenu has a certain core. There's a certain core of Rachel Imenu, that side of who we are, and that's a nekuda. That's a certain aspect. The cultation nekudas acheres, but all the other 9 parts, because we know that 10 is always a number of a complete system. So in other words, what the result is like describing Kilu, like if you imagine Rachel as this this put together system, so of 10 different parts, like imagine like a machine made of 10 parts. So 9 of the parts are taken apart. Like Rachel's falling apart, right? She's being dismantled. She's descending into Galus. Klal Yisrael is falling apart. Like the Vilna Gaon said, right? Klal Yisrael falls apart, and all that's left is mamish, a residue of life. It's the same thing over here. So 9 pieces of that machine that's called Rachel falls to the wayside, and all that's left is that just core one piece that is Rachel herself, right? That's how the Rizal is describing it. B'derech Mashal. Nimsa ki shorish Rachel the ikar, the essence of Rachel, in rak nekuda achas is a tenth. Is that one piece? The whole attention nekuda sacheres, all other 9 pieces. Again, what these 10 pieces? That's not the point for right now. But just imagine like such a thing. The other 9 pieces, heim b'sayt tosefes. They're extensions. They're building. They're building that structure that's called Rachel. They ain't a misharsh mitzvah. They're not essential though. That's something that was that Rachel, when she's fully built, she has 10 components there. But those 9 added components can be dismantled. As I said, Ariya Kaddish, when it comes to midnight, and this is true for Klal Yisrael during Galus, but every individual Jew experiences it on some level every night by midnight. Those 9 pieces, which until now have made Rachel the full stature of who Rachel is, they're taken away from her. So she is descending into what? Into ruin. So all she has is her one nakuda left, mamish, just her basic essence, but nothing else. But where do those other 9 pieces go? They're meanwhile being taken by Leah to rebuild Leah. V'al yodim nigdelas, and through those 9 pieces, Leah is built. The Nim says Leah nigdelas, v'rachel misma'etes v'aylecha. So you have this dynamic. Leah develops, and as Leah develops, Rachel is being dismantled. They don't, that's the tragedy of Galus. We'll see soon, is that until Mashiach comes, Rachel and Leah, it's either one or the other. To have both, that's Yemais Mashiach. Yemais Mashiach, like I said, is what? Is that the fully developed inner core of the Jewish people, which is Leah, then emerges, which is Rachel. And so that's what happens when Mashiach comes. Rachel and Leah are finally one. And this is the side, this is the mystery of that pasuk in I think it's in Yishai. The pasuk says that Hashem tells the Navi, take a piece of wood and write on it Yosef, and take another piece of wood, write on it Yehuda, that's Rachel and Leah, and put them together, and miraculously it'll be one piece of wood, and this will be a sign of what's going to be with the coming of Mashiach. The Rachel and Leah will finally be able to come back together. So it doesn't just mean that we'll all have, kumbaya, we'll all love each other, and all types of Yidden will just get along. There's a very deep Indian going on here. It means whatever, but usually Leah and Rachel, it doesn't work. Like either Leah is being built off the ruin of Rachel, or Rachel is being built off the ruin of Leah. So you can't have both. The Chiddush of Yemais Mashiach is that revelation of both. So he says again, 3 lines before the end. So Rachel misma'etes v'aylecha. So Rachel is decreasing, but Leah is getting bigger. Till the point of where Rachel only is remaining with that very essence of who she is, without any structure at all. So the reason you should know, Chas v'Shalom, Rachel is never destroyed. So it's not like even on the outside, the Jewish people, we're not Chas v'Shalom. There's always going to be some, it's like the Rambam writes already, that he already says that Chazal had a tradition, that there's always going to be a minion of Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. There's never going to be such a thing that there's never going to be a minion of Yidden in all of Eretz Yisrael. More than a minion, lav dafka, but at least a minion. And this is a haftacha that the Rebbeinu Shalom promised us, and it's a tradition from Chazal. Why? So let's say there's no minion. The answer is because, again, Eretz Yisrael and Klal Yisrael, that's the place of Rachel and Leah. That's the place where Malchus Yisrael should be fully developed. And Golus means that Malchus of Klal Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael is taken apart. But there always will remain that Nakuda. It's never completely destroyed. And the way to ensure that is that there's a minion in Eretz Yisrael, because it might not be millions of Yidden, but a minion means at least there's a tzibur. And if there's a tzibur, it means that Rachel Aminu Al Kapanim exists. Maybe not with all of her stature and beauty, but Al Kapanim it's there. But to that extent that it's being dismantled from Eretz Yisrael, it's being rebuilt in Leah, in Chutz La'aretz. So we'll see in a second. So he says, again, less than that nakuda, that's impossible, it'll never be destroyed. But as Leah is developing, even that nakuda is not as strong and as vibrant as it should be, and it's in a state of gauze. Said the Rizal Marmok number 2, he goes on, and with this background, he explains what Tikkun Chatzai says. Habayis is a mistake. So what's happened by Tikkun Chatzos is that 2 things are supposed to be. There's crying and mourning over the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and the destruction, dismantling of Rachel. Because that's mamish the moment when she's descending, when Rachel is falling apart and descending from that height that's called Atzilus to that lower place that's called Bria. And Hashem Yisbarach is also crying like a lion on the inside. And Rachel is on the outside. It's like these, people that love each other, they're not able to be brought together. So Rachel is falling apart in disarray and gullus. And Hashem Yisbarach is calling to her, and she's calling back, and there's like this heart-rendering scene of gullus, right? And you have to include yourself in the tsar of the Shechina and to feel the pain of Klal Yisrael and the pain of Rachel, of every single individual Jew, Rachel. In other words, Rachel, again, you have to make it more personal. Rachel Imenu means everything you want, everything good in life that you want to experience, right? So, if you have a Jew that's Rachel Atzlan sick, that means on some level the Rachel of his life is in ruin, right? Because again, Rachel means external. It means Malchus Yisrael on the outside. And Malchus Yisrael means Klal Yisrael, but also every individual person has their Malchus Yisrael. And when your Malchus is built and healthy and well in a rachel way, it means that you're a melech. It means that everything's going well, and the melech is not missing anything. It means you're healthy and well. It's gavaldik. If a person is experiencing any chisarn in life, it means that your rachel is in ruin. So when we talk about, the Rizal says to be meshatif and to be makashi yourself to the tsar of rachel imenu, so it might sound like this abstract thing, but it doesn't mean it means to feel the pain of another Jew and to feel your own pain of what is missing in your life on the outside, and it's just a matter of identifying that and defining those deficiencies as a deficiency in that part of the neshama, in that part of Hashem Yisparach's presence in the world. That's called Rachel. And so it's not about detaching yourself from the things that we want to warn about or we want to think about. It's deepening those things. I say many times, Hashem is not up there. Hashem is here, just deeper. It's just very often it's just a matter of that. It's just an issue of going deeper into the things that we already, are concerned about. So he said, yeah.
In light of what Rebbe told us yesterday, does that mean that's an expression of our difficulty in seeing the yichud in the pratim because we're going from that world back down to breathing?
Yeah. That's another. Yeah. We're going to see about that soon, but it's a similar dynamic of klal and prat. It's a similar dynamic. Rachel Imenu is that world of klal, and Leah Imenu it's that inyan. Me and Machazikas and Ruba, it's finding itself in that world of Leah, in that world of prat. Yeah, it's a very similar nakuda. A lot of these things are, when it comes to the world of Pneumis Torah, there's basically one or two sugis. That's it, and everything else is just a matter of packaging but there's a reason for that. It's not like being lazy like that, because it's all Hashemecha. So it has to ultimately boil down to one or two sukkahs. That's it, So that's anyway. So he goes on. Vishatif atzma is the second to last line in Marmuk number 2. Vishatif atzma sar shchina. So you connect yourself to the tsar of the shchina. Shezu hanukuda shrosh shel Rachel, which is that last little piece of Rachel Imenu, shiar de lamata, that has descended into Golas, into ruin. The yivka k'meichatzi shah yoiser. Okay, that's ready. Madrega, cry for a half hour or so over Tikkun Rachel. Right, Al Tirif Rachel, on the destruction of Rachel, the Gerusha on the Gerushin, the Gelusa, and on her Golos, Val Churb Meis Hamikdash, and that's all Tikkun Rachel. But then, at the same time, then there's something that's called Tikkun Leah. And what's Tikkun Leah? So in Marmukah number 3, also by Tikkun Chatzais Trishalf, the Rizal says the timer, and now you move. So for Tikkun Rachel, so you're crying and being mishtatif, and there's certain psukim to say, like some psukim in Eicha, on the Haris Bavel. There's all sorts of psukim to do. But over here in the third Marmukah, the Rizal now describes the transition from Tikkun Rachel to Tikkun Leah. Said the Rizal, timer tchila on Haris Bavel. So first you say kapitel Tilim that are more Rachelic, right, which are like on Haris Bavel and psukim of Eicha, like I said, Tzabrachan things. But v'yachakach, and then you switch to Tikkun Leah, which is Mizmer Lasa for Lakim Boil going Lanachlas. I'm sorry, that's still part of Tikkun Rachel. So on Haris Bavel. And Mizmul Asaf Lakim Boygan Lanachlesecha Psukim Kibiltum talking about Golas. The Achikach Tasla Tikkun Leah. And then you begin Tikkun Leah. What's Tikkun Leah? The timer. The David Mizmar Su Shamra Sheikhan, like the Shir Shal Yom of this morning, which is a very upbeat kapitel. Hashem, you create the world, everything's Gavaldik, Su Shamra Sheikhan, Yavim Melech HaKavod. It's like a Simchas Torah, The Achikach timer Mizmar Kyle Targo if you can mind. Then you say kapitel, which is talking about how we're jumping closer to Hashem and coming close to Him. And Psukim of Yichud, because again, that's exactly what's going on. Because as again, this is the chiddush over here, is that I know it's ironic to speak like this, as we get closer to the 3 weeks. But Golos is there's tachlis in Golos, there's purpose in Golos, because that's what we're seeing over here is that what's happening in Golos is that Rachel is falling apart, which is tragic. But the Leah Imenu is built from the ruins of Rachel. And so you could only have Tikkun Leah if you also have Tikkun Rachel. It's just the way it is. When Mashiach comes, you'll have both. That's what's going on over here. And again, so that's so again, just it's important to see this where this is rooted in the Kisvei Ari, but more than that, how this is mamish and avodah, part of every single day, and we can do this. You don't have to be a big Baal Madra. You mamish don't. If you find yourself awake at midnight, or by the way, according to Baal Tanya, he was even makel within an hour or two of midnight is also fine. Before you go to sleep, You say you open up any siddur, you'll be able to find Tikkun Rachel, Tikkun Leah. It's just a few kapitel Tehillim. Most of the Tehillim you know already. It's familiar kapitel. It's not like it's not that long. It doesn't take more than 15 minutes, and it's a gewaldige Zach, especially this time of year. Happens to be it's a chashuv thing to do.
Is it not preferable to wake up? I know, like in Pesach, they're not and I've heard that that to wake up for the concert.
So according to Rashash, there's no in of waking up for Tim Chatzais. The way it usually was always assumed was that you go to bed. I mean, again, it's not practical for our lifestyle, but you go to bed at sunset, right? And then you wake up by midnight, by Chatzais, and then you stay up the rest of the night learning davening, getting ready for Shacharis. That was a lot of times what people, that was the old way of doing it, and that's why it's super intimidating and not practical for us. But the Rashash that the Rashash came, Rashash is not a b'diavad. It's mamish. The Rashash said that's not the inyan of Tikkun Chatzais. Although that's if you can do that, it's gewaldig, right? But he said the main thing of Tikkun Chatzais is just being awake at that moment of midnight and saying these tehillim, saying these kapitach. You can sleep before, you can sleep after, whatever it is, but just that moment of midnight. Now, when is midnight? So it's also a big shayla what midnight is, right? Because usually when it comes to halacha, we don't just go with the clock, right? We have like shoyz manias, so it is a question. But l'maisa, there's enough place here, and there's enough mekubalim that say that when it comes to Tikkun Chatzais, if the clock says midnight, it's gesundheit, it's fine. And even the Baal Tanya said, if it's 11 o'clock, it's close, it's also fine. You don't have to be so. Very often we take things where it's the Eitzar that makes us want to be super machmer and then not do it at all. So sometimes it's good just to do it, and it's a big avodah because really it's a tikkun of galus. It's really developing this inyan of Rachel and Leah. Yeah.
Is there Tikkun Chatzais by day?
Huh?
Is there Tikkun Chatzais by day?
No, there's no tikkun chatzais by day. No, there's no tikkun chatzais by day. Again, because it's just a hillim. So, it's not bad to do it whenever, you know what I'm saying? So if you want to do it the right time, this is the right time to do it. But it's not like a bracha, it's not like chakras. It's not like, once you miss the opportunity, you're done. You can't,
It doesn't delay going into the Rachel?
Huh?
It doesn't go to...
So this is where the Kisari then move on to chakras. Chakras is, so the way it works is like at midnight, Rachel falls into disarray. And what happens is that by chakras time, when you start putting on talis and tefillin and so on, you're slowly but surely building Rachel back up and bringing Rachel out of Galus. Now, that's true that when Rachel comes out of Galus until Mashiach comes, Leah begins to fall apart, and that's sort of the back and forth that we have. But this is where Tikkun Chatzais is part of a larger structure of Shachas Mincha Ma'ariv, because Shachas Mincha Ma'ariv is also part of a process of rebuilding Rachel. On a very practical level, it's like davening Shachris properly gives a person the strength to have a good day, to have a physically and spiritually, on the outside, like a Rachel Dika day. And so that Rachel fell into disarray at midnight during the nighttime, and so she needs to be rebuilt by Shachris, and that's a big inyan in the Kisari, what's going on by Shachris in particular, of rebuilding the Rachel that fell apart at night. Not so much, and that's just one dimension of what's going on by Shachris. There's multiple things going on, but that's one side of Shachris, of rebuilding the Rachel of midnight. That's the dynamic. There's also in Yanim and Shachris of the Mechazik Leah, because we're not just ignoring Leah either. That's okay. That's a show one day. One day we'll be able to just stop this charade and just actually learn Kisveri straight from the beginning to the end, and then we'll be able to understand these things better. But now we have to be a little bit more still. KMH is only like 3 years old, so we have to can't push it so much. Anyway, so that's Tikkun Rachel, Tikkun Leah. Okay, so now I want to. It's already late, but for a few minutes, let's see a piece in Marmukah number 4, a piece from the Baal Tanya in Sefer Torah or in Parshat Vayetze, who now that we have this language of Rachel and Leah and this dynamic of Golus and Gula, Rachel falls apart, but Leah is rebuilt. So now we could see this piece of the Baal Tanya, we'll understand a little bit more what he's talking about, and it's it's an amazing thing. So let's see what he says. Hine, Leah v'Rachel him oisis hamachshav oisis hadiba. So the Baal Tanya says whenever you find the Svarim Leah and Rachel, a way to think of it could be within the person himself, of that you have your thoughts and you have your words that you articulate to other people. So the words that you say, which is on the outside, what would that be? That's Rachel. The thoughts that you have behind those words, right? Because first you think and then you speak. That's the way it's supposed to be, right? So the thoughts that you have, that's Leah, and the words that you say is Rachel. So he says like this: Leah Rachel heim oisis hamachshava It's the word, the letters of your thoughts, so to speak, right? And the letters of your words. Shem Alma Diskasia, Alma Disgalia, or the hidden universe of who you are, Shava, and the revealed universe of who you are. It's your deeper. V'zeh inyan is halach l'fnei Hashem ba'aretz Yisachai. Said the Baal Tanya, and with that background, that's true for every individual Jew. And Eretz Yisrael is a place that's called, David Melch says, I walk before Hashem in the lands of life, plural. Eretz Yisrael is being described as as if it's like two countries in the same geographical location. What are the two countries? Beis Aratzis. Shebizman shebeis hamikdash hayekayim. When the Beis Hamikdash was around, hayushnei habechinas meiris be'Eretz Yisrael. You have these two qualities. You had Rachel and you had Leah. The ikr hayebechinas Rachel. Right? Again, in the times of Beis Hamikdash, the ikr was Malchus Yisrael was developed, and there's always a Leah. But Lamaisa, when Rachel Aminu was developed, it means it's on the cheshvan of Leah. So you had Rachel and Leah, but Lamaisa the ikr is Rachel. Ki ha-machshava misalbeshes teicha dibur v'adibur misgal, because that's what happens when a person is speaking. You're also thinking, but your thoughts are secondary to what you're saying, right? Because the ikr is that you're focused on is your speech. You have to think about what to say, but the main focus is what you're saying. So Rachel, whenever there's a Rachel, she like takes over the show, right? Ulafi shebechinas Rachel shebechinas dibur. So what does that mean practically? So it says the Tanya, since Rachel, which is speech, who Alma Disgalia is the revealed Malchus of the Jewish people, of the Jew, Lakach Haya Az Be'Eretz Yisrael Gilu Yelakusa. So when Rachel is built in Eretz Yisrael with the Beis Hamikdash, so that reflected itself, that created a dynamic of what? Of revealed godliness. So you had Nevi'im walking around, and you had Ruach HaKodesh, and Baskals, and you had amazing things, miracles going on, right? So you Chachamim Gedolim, you have big Chachamim, Bali Ruach HaKodesh, and Nevi'im. Masha'enkin Achar from Beis Hamikdash, so that's when you had Rachel built. Okay? So it's Rachel's Gevaldik, then everything's on the outside, everything's beautiful. No, what happens by the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? Shagol Yisrael, Klal Yisrael goes into Galus, Gol Seimah Mashchina, and the Shechina goes into Galus. What do I mean? What aspect of the Shechina falls into disarray? She Bechinas Rachel. It's the Rachel that falls apart, again, just like by Tikkun Chatzos. Umikol Makom, Nisha Beretz, so what? But again, as Rachel is breaking down, what's being actually rebuilt and built up is what? Is Leah. Mikol Makom Nisha Beretz Yisrael Bechinas Leah. But now, an amazing thing happens. Dafka in Eretz Yisrael said the Baal Tanya, in Galus, there is a Malchus there. What's the Malchus? The Malchus of Leah. The Malchus of that hidden world, of the Machshav, of the thought, that hidden place. The Madrega Yoiser Gevayim Bechinas Rachel. And in a certain sense, what is experienced in the Malchus of Leah, if you know the secret knock to get into that Malchus of Leah, there's deeper inyanim and deeper secrets that are being revealed in that place of Leah, right? Again, just like we said last week with Torah Shbal Peh versus Nevuah. Nevuah is Gevaldik, but it's Racheldik, and therefore it's limited. But Torah Shbal Peh is hidden, it's coming from that place of Leah Menu, and because of that, it's unbelievably deeper. Again, there's so much more nuance to Torah Shbal Peh than there is to Torah Shebechsav. But now the Baal Tanya is going to say the same thing, but with a different mashal, not Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shbal Peh, a different mashal. Just like a person's thoughts, when you're thinking something, you could think much deeper than anything you can say, right? So if you're preparing a speech, you could have in your mind you could have a lot of ideas to say, but yet you don't have 5 hours, so you have no choice but to cut things out, and you say you speak for 45 minutes, whatever the case may be, right? And so whenever there's speech is much more limited in thought. You could think much deeper ideas than you could articulate, right? When you try to articulate deep ideas, they come out confused, like today. So so you're much more limited. But so this is the funny dynamic. If you're Leiadic, you're deeper, but on the outside, no one sees it, and you can't even express it yourself. So on the inside, you're like a deep yid, but you don't even know it yourself. It's like all biskasio. Therefore, says a tiny amazing thing. In Eretz Yisrael, in Galus, the revelation of God's presence, which is Racheldik, that's not there. It's not there. Rachel's in ruin. There's a minion, but very limited. But those big tzaddikim that are in Eretz Yisrael during Galus, that are able to connect to the Leah, to that pneumius, to the inner essence, that inner core of who they are, Yichoyim lahasig achshav beretz Yisrael hasogis al yoines yoiser afil mashesigu tzadikim kemaisim bizman habayis. They could be masik things now, and they could reach levels within themselves deeper than even the tzaddikim during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. As Isaac the Tanya, and he goes on to give examples of this. That Rizal and people like this that had hasogis greater than Nevi'im, greater than Nevi'im. The difference is that the Nevi'im, it was out in the open, it was Rochadik, and the Arizal is Leadik. By the way, this is not so again, it's a similar dynamic. When Leah is built, so it's much more potent, but it's hidden. So you have to sort of get into that place. Similar, what you'll find in many Svarim is a similar dynamic within Emunah. So in Golas, Leah is built. Leah is the place where a Jewish person develops a deep level of Emunah. Emunah is built. What environment does it take to really cultivate Emunah? Dafka when Rachel is broken, right? When Rachel is out in the open and everything's gavaldik on the outside, that's not a place that's developing deep Emunah. Deep Emunah is developed Dafka when Rachel is destroyed, and Leah is being rebuilt. That's the Malchus of Rachel is the Malchus of miracles and open revelation. The Malchus of Leah is the Malchus of Emunah. That's the difference. It's the Malchus of Emunah. It's the Malchus of Yehuda, the Malchus of that inner core, that inner dimension. And those Yidden that are living during the times where Rachel is in ruin, and and all there is Leah, they better run to Leah. They better run to that place of Emunah, because that's the Malchus that's in existence at that moment. If they're relying on the worlds of Rachel, they're in trouble, because it's not the Avodah. The Avodah is Leah. The Avodah is Leah. And if you can get into that place of Leah to cultivate within yourself a deep level of Emunah, you'll be a bigger Mammon than those that lived during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. Because in the Beis Hamikdash, they were Racheldik, which is Gavaldik, but they were not Leadik. But if you're during Galus, then you're a Leadik Yid. And you can become your Emunah is much deeper. And then when Mashiach comes, and Rachel is rebuilt, but miraculously Rachel's then built with not needing Leah to be dismantled. And then you have a yichud of Rachel and Leah, and now you have that unbelievable deep Emunah and a almost a sixth sense to detect God's presence in your life, plus open miracles. That's what you want. That's what you want. That's like having a chasana for a couple that's already been married for a few years where they know each other. So it's like when you have a chasana, that's also a Rachel Dikinyan. So it's very out in the open. There's a band and there's like a smorgasbord and everything's going on, but the chasana, they don't know who they are. They don't know each other. So their relationship is it's chitzonistic. So it has chitzonistic zachen. And then you move a few years later, where there's no band anymore, but they know each other. It's a Leah Dikinyan. What Mashiach is both. Is that deep relationship that Knesset Yisrael and the Jewish people have had over the years of Galus now come with a band. That's an unbelievable thing, and that's what Gula is. One last Nakuda in Marmukah number 5. This is just interesting. Okay, this is interesting. This is a piece from a sefer called She'eres Yaakov. It's Rav Shimon Morgenstern Shlit, his Torah on Maseches Brachos. This is a classic Rav Shimon Morgenstern. It's something that you'll see right away. He says like this: the Chazinon, we see the Meshech Hadaris Rabim over the many generations of Galus, Loi Nogi Inyan shall covet Hatzadikim, covet Gedolei Torah Beretz Yisrael. It's an amazing thing. There was something missing in terms of the covet of a Talmud Chacham in Eretz Yisrael over the years of Galus. How so? Shekulim Hayoaniyim, they were all poor, right? So in other words, in Chutz La'aretz, said Rav Shemaiah, you always had that's where you had Malchus, you had Shivas and Rebbes, they had all. It was a big thing, right? In Eretz Yisrael, what was going on in the 1800s or earlier? Nebuch. You would have Ga'inei Oilam, people that mamish knew Kol Torah Kul in their fingertips, and you still have this a little bit, where they're just walking through the streets wearing shmatas, and the covet of Torah, the covet of tzaddikim, was not that great. And they would, the parnasa of the tzaddikim in Eretz Yisrael, it would depend on chutz la'aretz. That's the way it is, right? So he says like this. So throughout the old Doris, it was always like this. Harbe tzaddikim gedolim she'olu mechutz la'aretz Eretz Yisrael, and many big rabbis and tzaddikim that made aliyah during the years of Golus, Paska Beretz Yisrael kol malchus hakdula shaylam. So it's not only the pshat. So says Rav Shimon, it's not only the pshat. Okay, maybe the economy. They don't have a strong economy there, but it's much deeper than that. Even tzaddikim in chutz la'aretz that experienced the malchus and they traveled with their entourage, they come to Eretz Yisrael. There's no malchus anymore, right? So like we could even small little things of again I'm too young to know this, but I'm told, like, let's say by Rosh Zalman, you just knock on his door and, like, Shmuz of the Rosh Zalman. Imagine such a thing. In America, to go to like a Rashiva like that, you can't knock on their door. It doesn't work like that. But there was no, the whole, it's a little bit lacking in kavod, but that whole aura of like Melech and Malchus, it wasn't like that. It was not like that. So he says why? So he says Kol Malchus HaKadosh when the Chutzlars, it stopped when they get to Eretz Yisrael. V'utzchul Lisparnis min and Stokas shel b'nei Chutzlars, and they're being supported by Stokas coming from Chutzlars. The Hezr is that. So what's the shot? So he says the Hezr is the Eretz Yisrael b'chinas derech Leah, because during Galus, what's the Malchus? What's going on in Eretz Yisrael? What's the Malchus of Eretz Yisrael? It's Leah. Shedark b'chinas anova v'shiflos uloi chashivas, and because Leah is a Malchus of the inside, it's skasi, it's hidden, and it's not with the royalty on the outside of Rachel. So that reflects itself even in the tzaddikim of Eretz Yisrael during Galus, which is they lack the royalty on the outside. So it's all pashut. Even the Gemara says such a thing. The Gemara says that what's the difference between Talmid Chacham of Eretz Yisrael versus Bavel? The Gemara says that the Talmid Chacham of Bavel wear fancy clothing. They walk, and you could tell, you could know, oh, he's a Talmid Chacham. But the Gemara says that in Eretz Yisrael, everyone walks around with the same peasant clothing. You can't even tell who's who. So the Gemara actually says it as a mile. The Gemara says that in Bavel, because we're not at home, so we have to make ourselves feel more chashuv. But in Eretz Yisrael, they're at home. They're comfortable with who they are. They don't have to make themselves look anything special. So it says Rav Shemar, but this is reflective of a deeper truth. Golus in Eretz Yisrael is the place of Leah, and Leah is hidden. Adarabah, the Shechina of Rachel, has completely left Eretz Yisrael. But he says like this: Ubador ha'achrain. But here's the amazing thing: that in the last generations, what we've seen so far, in the last few decades and so on, is sheschalta Rachel lachzer latzilos. It's an amazing thing. It's not just Rav Shemar. This is said by other tzaddikim too. That when Eretz Yisrael, again, this is again very Rav Kook Torah. Rav Kook talks a lot about how chashuv it is for Eretz Yisrael to physically be rebuilt. Right? That's the kuf that he was in early 1900s, late 1800s. He called that the time of the tchiyah, the resurrection, right? Where people started moving back to Eretz Yisrael and working the land, developing the land, on all levels. And so Rav Kook saw that as something amazing happening. What was it? What was happening then? Al pi Kabbalah, al pi Site, to identify that, to give terminology for it, is that Rachel is being rebuilt. Rachel is being rebuilt. When Eretz Yisrael is swampland, that's the Malchus of Leah. When Eretz Yisrael is built with cities and structures and beautiful gardens and so on, that's called the Malchus of Rachel. But again, the Chiddush of Geula is what? Is that when Rachel is rebuilt with Yemaisa Mashiach, it's not dismantling the world of Leah. So you have this unbelievable Chiddush during the times of Yemaisa Mashiach and leading up to it, where Rachel is being rebuilt without pulling apart the Malchus of Leah that's been cultivated over the years of Golos. It says Rav Shemar, so Dafka now, not only do we see Eretz Yisrael physically being rebuilt, but by the tzaddikim, bells and ger, it's not, you can't just knock on Rosh Shiva's doors anymore. It doesn't work like that. So it's Rachmanis on the average person. There's no Rosh Zalman to knock a door on, but Lamaisa, it means that there's more Malchus. When there's more Malchus, and there's more Gabayim, and all these things, that means Rachel. That means Rachel. It's an external on the outside. There's certain chashivas. You can't just go into the king on the outside, right? So what's happening is that Rachel is returning to Eretz Yisrael. Rachel is being rebuilt, and that's a huge sign of the coming of Gula. When Rachel is beginning to return to that place of Atzilus, so now the Hanhaga, the Malchus of Rachel, is returning to Eretz Yisrael. The Noistim Kvar Kavod v'Chashivas, Tzaddikim Gedol Yoter Eretz Yisrael. Now there's already more Chashiv and more Chashivas and more Kavod the tzaddikim in Eretz Yisrael than there used to be. I was talking to Dovi Safir about this, like in the early 1900s. He was he's a great guy. He was telling me like he wishes to have like a time machine to go to like Yerushalayim of old of the 1900s. I mean, I told him, I don't know about that. I mean, if I had a time machine, I might go to other places. It was not an easy time to live. But you do such a thing, mamish kedoyle hadar, habels like mamish poverty should be poverty. But now it's not like the Baruch Hashem. I mean, it's still. Don't get me wrong. Rachel is not built up. Rachel is not built up properly. You have places where Rachel still needs to be developed, and you have places where Rachel's developed, but it's not expressing Malchus Yisrael in such a holy way. That's the dynamic of what's going on right now in Israel a little bit. But slowly but surely, you see this at least effort of Malchus, of Rachel and Leah to try to work together and to come together in that way of Gulonu. So Hashem should help us to be able to see the return of Malchus Beis Yisrael in full with Rachel and Leah B'Yisrael Tzedek Me'av